Hello, welcome back to Britannium Times Live. This might be our last Saturday morning episode. This morning as I woke up, or tried to wake up, at 6:30, suddenly Tuesday nights at 9 p.m. sounded like a better time. Anyway, it's going to be a good show. We're going to talk a little bit about leftist entryism. Oh, don't laugh at me, Heather. Anyways, we have, unfortunately, a very terrible guest later. Just kidding. A good guest. Entertaining, I'm sure, especially after she's only had one coffee. Har. But she's actually a conservative artist, and we're just going to talk about how she, in a typically a liberal community, she kind of found her way to not being a liberal. Who knew you can actually increase your IQ score? Who knew? Libtardism is not necessarily a permanent condition. Not necessarily. Well, what's been going on? Oh, the accuser for Kavanaugh. She's only willing to speak to Congress under the right conditions, which include Kavanaugh not being there. Trump orders declassification of FBI collusion documents. And then he says, but not all of them. So I don't mind the mess behind me. I had zero time to set up. So as I overslept. But such things happen, and it's okay. The first piece I want to talk about, William Mason put up a nice post on Social Matter. It's called Rightist Ecology, Leftist Entryism, and the Tragedy of Earth First. So, conservation, environmentalism, most people tend to think of it as an exclusive leftist agenda. It is not. Many of us, especially in the neo-reaction movement, take it seriously, even though we're skeptical over things that have an obvious agenda, that are scare tactics and for political manipulation, such as climate change, global warming, and whatnot. We do take seriously taking care of the earth that is our home. But most people believe that's just a political ecology is in the exclusive domain of the left. And how did that happen? William Mason kind of talks about that. He starts out, well, he uses the group called Earth First as a prime example. They started out as a primarily conservative movement. But as he says, as anyone on the right can observe, any organization in contemporary America that does not explicitly reject the liberal pieties of our society, globalism, egalitarianism, hedonistic individualism, and democratic rule, will soon find itself undone by them, neutralized by a few well-timed appeals to equality and diversity. So entryism, it's a political strategy in which an organization or state encourages its members or supporters to join another, usually larger, a larger organization in an attempt to expand influence and expand their ideas and program. Leftists do this all the time. If your group doesn't explicitly reject the liberal pieties, it's going to happen, and it's completely 100% unavoidable. And as you see, it also happens with government on every level, every organization on every level. So if you don't have a hierarchical structure, it's just going to happen. It's going to happen. usually it takes a little time as the group grows bigger, and if it'll increase in mass and visibility to the left, that's when they start to take notice. So they'll start out by critiquing the organization from the outside, drawing a few of its members to its cause, and start crying out for a more diverse and active campaign in social justice, etc., etc. Sabotage the group's ability to accomplish anything without taking a hard look at their inherited privilege first. So they browbeat some of the weaker, more insecure members of the group. They call for greater democracy and transparency, inclusivity in the group's leadership, until eventually the original power structure is completely undermined, and you have a new regime, basically. So a regime change. Once the cohesion has been weakened, you'll see the original leaders ousted, and the members that are unwilling to be re-educated will also be ousted. This happened to Earth First around 1990. So originally there were a more conservative environmentalist group but their mistake was they valued their egalitarianism. We saw what that got them. They were not interested in advancing any other political agenda beyond defending the wilderness against corporate greed and bourgeois complacency. And they had an ecological manner bund with myths and heroes, kind of like the same thing that we're trying to build in the reactionary movement. And in case you don't believe me that this is not real, I printed out Earth's first anti-oppression policy. Now, this came out in 2007, so it seems like it might be dated now. They may be missing, well, you'll see. They might be missing some classifications. No, I'm not sponsored by McDonald's. But you can't beat McDonald's coffee. Isn't that right, Heather? Isn't that your favorite coffee? McDonald's? No, it's not. Okay. Well, let's start out by reading this first paragraph of the anti-oppression policy. The Earth First Journal editorial. Collective recognizes that the institutional, economic, political, social, and cultural dynamics of hierarchy, power, and privilege that define mainstream society also permeate the radical environmental movement. These dynamics are expressed in various interlocking systems of oppression: racism, sexism, classism, heterosexism, ageism, ableism, and speciesism, which prevent equal access to resources and safety, disrupt healthy communities and movement building, and severely, sometimes irreparably, harm our allies, our friends, and loved ones, and ourselves. I think by ableism, they mean by ability. So I don't know how you can function as a operative group if you don't have some sort of discrimination by ability. It seems reasonable that you would want to assign certain tasks by ability. And I think most people who have lesser ability kind of understand that they're good at some things and not so good at other things, right? But apparently that's a form of oppression to Earth First now. Learn new things every day. We understand that failing to address oppressive behavior not only weakens our movement by alienating and further victimizing our friends and allies, it also calls into question our commitment to a better world and our qualification as a radical movement. So, to be a radical movement, they feel that it needs to be qualified by social justice. So they've definitely moved into the social justice game. As we'll find here, they go on to define what oppressive behavior is. We define oppressive behavior as any conduct, typically along the lines of institutionalized power and privilege, that demeans, marginalizes, rejects, threatens, or harms any living being on the basis of ability, activist experience, age, class, income level, cultural background, education, ethnicity, gender, immigration status, language, nationality, physical appearance, race, religion, self-expression, sexual orientation, species, status as a parent, or other such factors. Oppressive behavior comes in a wide variety of forms, from seemingly harmless jokes to threats of violence, from interrupting to verbal abuse, from unwanted touching to rape, from hitting to murder, and some other forms are more extreme and irreparable than others, but all are unacceptable under the journal's anti-oppression policy. I'd say that if this was written in 2018, there'd be probably a few more categories. Like binary, or what are the, I don't know. One of the 72 new genders. But I find this interesting. They mention ability, so rejects or marginalizes based on ability, experience, background, and education. So I wonder if they would apply this to like the workplace for jobs. Are you not allowed to discriminate on certain positions based on ability, experience, and education? Because that seems pretty important and relevant. And with these seamless jokes, I don't think I would last long here, honestly, because jokes are now oppression. Jokes are oppressive. Their argument is that it accumulates over time. Whatever. Don't be snowflakes. How's that? So this policy aims to empower all journal participants to challenge oppressive behavior and provide them with skills and resources to do so effectively, including educational materials. So they will re-educate you. Shall you make an off-colored joke? Now what's interesting, they actually go on to kind of admit that they were once conservative. Here's the last line of their goals: to combat the troubling legacy of oppression that continues to plague the journal, Earth First, the radical environmental movement, and our society as a whole. So they're definitely ashamed of their conservative beginnings, and they make that very clear. Of course, I guess not very clear. They're kind of cryptic with it. They call it the legacy of oppression. So being mentally stable is oppressive. The best way to deal with oppressive behavior is to prevent it from happening in the first place. Therefore, the Journal Collective will ensure that all editors, staff, and volunteers are familiar with this policy, with the understanding that all participants in the journal community are expected to abide by it. Additionally, we will support individuals who are unfamiliar with the terms and ideas used in this policy by making available more resources, essays, books, websites, on topics such as building conflict resolution skills, promoting consent and mental health, dealing with sexual assault, animal abuse, and other forms of violence, Oh, here we go. Confronting male heterosexual white privilege and supporting anti-racist organizing and border justice. Wait, I thought this was an environmentalist group. They might need to edit that because now the gay white men are oppressive too against the transgenders. So 2007, I think we need to turn into 2018. Guys, update this. Heather, can you think of anything that they need to update? Let me know. Comment. We believe that anticipating these patterns, like being a straight white male, the wall is going to slice in half the birds. Okay. So we believe that anticipating these patterns, avoiding counterproductive reactions, and aiming for ideal outcomes will benefit nearly all anti-oppression processes, like being a straight white male. So they're just gonna have to ban us from the group. No more straight white male environmentalists. Well, I guess if you self-reflect and acknowledge your white guilt and make notional reparations, emotional ones. Like, I'm so sorry. I'm going to be active and for your social justice, but I'm not going to give my money all away to you. No, I'm just going to scream and whine about how unjust our society is and say I'm sorry for my people for stuff that I wasn't personally ever involved in. All participants in the journal should consider it their responsibility to be aware of oppressive behavior, to challenge it actively whenever it occurs, and to create a safe space for people facing oppression to share their experiences. I don't think I had, in 2007, had ever heard of a safe space. I think the first time I heard that was around 2014. So it looks like at this point in 2007, Earth First was already far left, radicalized to the far left more than what has seeped into the mainstream now, which is interesting. It is important to recognize that oppressive behavior occurs every day, often in seemingly trivial ways. For example, interrupting is a common behavior that reinforces power dynamics. Those with white male heterosexual privilege frequently interrupt or talk over those without this privilege, thereby marginalizing people of color, women, and queer folks. Over time, seemingly minor interruptions, jokes and slurs, and stereotypes can snowball into a pattern of oppression that is far more damaging than an isolated incident. Well, okay. Let's see how many times I interrupt Heather so that I can reinforce this power dynamic over her. My white male heterosexual privilege. Well, that's enough of that. It's pretty obvious that they're not what they started out as. But what is the motivation of the left for doing this? What is it that what motivates them to enter these groups that aren't explicitly left-wing? I think it really comes down to envy. They're prideful and they're envious. If there's a group that's seceding that does not have a leftist bent, that bothers them. They feel that. And I think it's even, I think that they have a sense of being an underdog, even though they never are, as I've mentioned before. To them, it's it's like they're stuck in victim status. It's like a faux victim. And they're envious of basically everyone. They're definitely prideful, which I was going to go over this little blog. It's pretty short, from the orthosphere to spite the world. But I don't think... Well, he does. It is kind of relevant in the sense that he talks about how Satan was the archetype of the injured pride and envy. So the beginning of Satan's fall was his envy of God. The beginning of our fall was Satan's envy of us. I really think that, evil is evil. Liberalism is evil. And thus they just have the impetus, because of their pride, to infiltrate everything that's good, everything that's succeeding without them. And they would rather not just let something be as a single, they can't just let a conservative or even a, just bipartisan group be an activist group pushing for just this bipartisan issue, which really it should be. We should be taking care of our home. Earth is our home. And they can't let that be. So how do you prevent that from happening? Well, you have to have a hierarchical structure, kind of like we have over here at Britannium Times, where I rule over my guests. Just kidding. But seriously, a hierarchical structure that doesn't allow just anybody to come in, and an explicit rejection of the liberal pieties. That's the only way to do it. So it is the only way. Now I'm going to try and see if I can get a hold of a special guest, Heather Joy, the most famous artiste in the world. Or shall I say, infamous. There we go.
Hello.
Heather.
Michael.
Say hello to all the thousands of people that aren't watching.
Hi.
So, before we get started, well, I guess we are getting started. Well, let's start with, what do you do artistically? Just give us a rundown of that and how long you've been doing it.
Well, I'm a painter, a musician, a performance artist, costume designer, and been known to dance, and sometimes write poetry and things like that. Model. I also am a model.
Okay. Which one do you focus on primarily?
Right now, I'm focusing mostly on painting and performance art and film. Actually, that's another thing. Working with my fiance, Eric.
Never heard of him.
Film. What's that?
I said I never heard of him. Who's that?
Oh.
Just kidding. JK. So I know that you're from Baltimore. Well, you're really from not Baltimore, but you were in the Baltimore community of art. Now
yes,
you're
how long I've been doing this. I've been an artist since I guess 14. But the various art forms have because I listed a lot of things. That's a lot of work. So I have I sort of cycle through the different art forms. Since I was about 14. And I've been in the Baltimore. I moved to Baltimore. I would say I became a part of the Baltimore art scene around, maybe 2001, 2002, something like that.
Can you describe what the Baltimore art scene is like? Like what type of people they are? I know.
Politically, they're mostly leftist. Since I have expanded my horizon politically, or I've become more politically aware, I've come to realize that there are a lot of libertarian and conservative artists. They just happen to be pretty quiet about it, due to not wanting to be ostracized for their beliefs or feelings.
Well, libertarianism, it's like astrology for men.
Well,
I wouldn't really be talking about it either if I was a libertarian. I'd just kind of be quiet myself.
Yeah.
It's like, what's your sign? Oh, I'm a Sagittarius.
Well, I think a lot of artists, myself included, have a live and let live sort of policy. I'm not going to force my beliefs on you, and I don't want you to force your beliefs on me. So it's a very American perspective. But
yeah. Well, how was it? You don't have to get too detailed here. How did you make your transition from being, I guess, because I take it you weren't always conservative. How did you make that transition to being conservative, and what was the time? How long did that take?
Well, I have a really hard time with labels. I would say the better question would be, becoming more politically aware. Because I think a lot of times, especially with liberalism, you just kind of assume that you're a liberal because, the media and the general consensus is that, conservatives are authoritarian and bad, and liberals are free-spirited and open-minded. And I would say that my transition from understanding that, from ignorance into more understanding has been kind of an elongated process. Because I was an active Christian for a while when I entered into the Baltimore art scene, which was under Bush. And, a lot of people in the art scene would talk about how they were supportive of religious freedom and, didn't want they were open to religion, basically. And I said, well, that's great. I'm a Christian and I love Jesus, you know. And there would be kind of like a recoiling action that would happen. And, you know, they would say, well, you know, you want to kill the rest of the world or whatever, you know. I'm being hyperbolic, but that's kind of like how they would act. And I was like, wait a minute. I thought that you said that you were open to people's religious and spiritual beliefs. So that was kind of like my first clue that maybe there was some contradiction in the philosophy. You know, then as I moved out of that, because it's hard for me to say what I believe or what I think I am, because I'm open to change. If I receive information, new information, I adapt. I will throw out outdated when I incur new information that shows me that my previous beliefs are faulty, I will then evolve. I just began to understand that there was some contradictions, and I began to look into things more deeply and ask more questions and start to see inconsistencies, and then realize there were some things like what you were talking about earlier with, you know, earth conservationism, because one of my major influences and of my work is about nature, and so I'm very nature conscious, and you know, that doesn't necessarily mean that I am a liberal. I don't understand how nature conservationism has to be limited to a political party. I think that there's just different approaches to how you go about caring for the earth and caring for people.
Yeah.
But you know, the whole Hailgate fiasco kind of catapulted me at a much faster rate than what I was already growing in, and and that happened in 2016. And since then, I've just spent the past couple of years just really immersing myself in politics and a lot of these questions and agendas, really researching them and spending a lot of time reading and listening to dissenting voices and sort of becoming more politically aware.
One thing. What?
Does that answer your question?
Yeah. My oppressive questions.
Yeah.
I know you mentioned they were like open to religion but hostile to Christians.
Yeah.
Did that evolve over time, like closer to 2016? Did it become worse or more explicit?
No. That's the thing that's kind of interesting, because you know, and something that I would say to them would be, you know, how I would disagree with some of the Bushite era policies, because I felt that they were actually anti-Christian. So I started to see a transition out of a hostility towards Christianity to an embrace of Christianity, and then from the embrace of Christianity to a sort of attitude that we're actually better Christians than the Christians. And then you start to see these arguments where someone is a Christian but they have conservative viewpoints or are pro-Trump or whatever. You'll start to see arguments where the person is like, well, you can't be a good Christian because X, Y, and Z. You know, you gotta love your
Let me oppressively interject here.
Yeah.
that kind of ties right into what I was talking about with the entryism,
Yeah.
because they basically infiltrated the more modern style churches. They kind of they co-opted a form of Christianity, but then the more hierarchical, conservative, and traditional churches were kind of already had like a barrier that kind of defended them from that. Would you say that's that's the difference?
I mean, to a degree. I mean, I think that even with Catholics and other mainline churches are also being infiltrated with these. I don't even want to call them liberal because I think that
it's the lavender mafia.
Yeah, because I mean, I think that liberalism has its place. I think conservatism has its place. I think it's good to have opposing political forces because it helps keep the other party honest. Because it's good to have opposition. Healthy critique is good. But it's gone from being like a healthy critique to being downright hostile and authoritarian. So I remember in Maryland, when Maryland passed the gay marriage, I remember driving around Baltimore and seeing all of these churches with rainbow flags outside of them. The United Methodist Church was flying rainbow flags, and the Lutheran Church had a rainbow flag outside of it. So, I mean, I think that, I myself personally have no issue with homosexuals, but the reason why they were hanging those flags was because there was the vote on the ticket, on the ballot about gay marriage. So, when I was younger, I was always under the impression that churches were supposed to, or maybe it was like an unspoken rule, that politics and the church, like, you shouldn't be preaching politics from the pulpit.
Well, basically. It's okay if it's well, first, the law says that if they do, you can lose your tax exemption. But the reality is you only lose it if you speak out against any liberal thing. So if you go up and you speak out against gay marriage on the pulpit, you'll probably have issues. But if you come out in support of it, then you won't have any issues.
Yeah, and then the churches are always trying to do whatever they can to increase attendance and membership.
Which hasn't worked.
And which, these sorts of agendas, it's really insidious, because I think that at bottom most people are good-natured. They don't want to see other people hurt. As Americans, we want our freedoms. We appreciate our freedoms. We want everyone to have those freedoms. So they take advantage of that good-naturedness and then start to slowly, it's like the frog in the pot,
Yeah.
So, then it becomes more and more, it turns into what we see today, where you are then being told what to think, how to feel. It's like, well, if that's what you want to do, I'm obviously not going to stop you from doing that, but this is what I'm going to do. And then now they're like, well, you can't do that.
Well, it's like blasphemy laws.
Say again?
It's like blasphemy laws.
I don't say that word again.
Blasphemy. That's the way that
blasphemy laws.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So you have, and because these sorts of parlances and viewpoints are mainstream and they're part of the establishment and are popular, the churches are going to, and the art themes and all the various cultural, or like what you were reading with nature conservatism, are going to adopt these things that are popular because they want to appeal to the broadest audience possible. So it's seen as it's the establishment. It's basically I've watched from W. Bush being in office to now, the I don't even want to call it liberal. Like, what's the better word? Progressive or far left agenda becoming more and more mainstream and more part of the establishment.
Well, yeah, classical liberalism is basically far right conservatism in our structure.
Now it is, yeah.
Even what we would say was just like liberal is now conservative. From maybe like 10 years ago is now a conservative.
Right. And if you don't keep up, if say you were a writer or a professor or somebody who just spent like a couple of years really immersed in a project that you were, a book you were writing. So you were just, the only thing you were doing was just researching your book and writing your book and doing all of that. And you come out of it and open your door and you're like, okay, time for me to promote my book or whatever. And you're like, this one thing that used to be polite 2 years ago is now seen as offensive.
Yeah.
So, the rules are changing at such a rapid pace that, and they're logically and philosophically inconsistent. So you can't really, it becomes very confusing. It reminds me of Jainism, to be honest with you. Are you familiar with Jainism?
Explain it.
Jainism is an ancient Eastern religion where they take nonviolence to the absolute extreme. So they wear masks on their face so as to not accidentally, breathe a bug in. They walk around with little brooms and sweep out in front of them where they walk. So they make sure that they don't walk on any insects or anything like that. So they're like, the reason why it makes me think of that is because you have to do all of these things in order to not offend anyone. So you're walking around on eggshells all the time, just being hyper conscious as to like, oh, is this possibly offensive? And then I feel like that's offensive.
Yeah. Well, well, what point did you? Let me just you made a couple of points that I want to touch on, but we'll center on this.
Sure.
Like I've always been. I know you haven't known me forever, but I've always been kind of sarcastic, funny, right?
Yeah. Sure.
And that was okay for most people. Most people understood it. People didn't really get offended. They understood that a joke was a joke. And then suddenly around like 2013, 2014, suddenly I became, instead of just a funny guy, I was a troll all of a sudden. Like it went from this, you're now a troll. I wasn't politically correct. I don't think I changed. It was like the world around me changed. And it did you notice that? And what do you think caused that?
For me personally, it's kind of a twofold thing. Like I feel like who I am at my core hasn't really changed. I've just taken in more information and have grown and learned accordingly. But at bottom, I'm still the same person. But why? You're making me think that the internet has something to do with it, because things are changing. We're able to communicate at such a faster rate, and ideas can grow and propagate at a much faster rate. So, someone has like a harebrained idea that, this type of person is weak and oppressed and needs to be protected, and then it spreads like wildfire, and next thing you know, they're parading their weakness and bashing anyone with whatever means they have available to them who are not acknowledging their weakness in some kind of way. So I think maybe the internet has something to do with it. I mean, obviously the election of Trump, I mean, these are all, these are ideas and topics that have been talked about at length. But I'm not sure if we've really explored the impact that social media and, well, I mean, people do talk about social media, but the internet in general, how that contributed to the rapid change, the rapid evolution of philosophies. But it's definitely picked up because of the election in 2016.
I mean, I think there's some validity to, like, our society has, with the transfer of information, it's gotten to a point where it's so instant, and maybe we haven't learned how to deal with technology like that.
And actually reflect on these ideas that we're putting forth, and then just like, it is kind of like the emperor has no clothes kind of idea too, because if you have someone that's in a leadership position who says, okay, this rule is now in effect, and then everyone is, not everyone, but a lot of people begin enforcing that rule or acting according to that rule, and it's so fast that a lot of people don't have time to actually think about the veracity of the claim, and actually think about the implications, or maybe the illogical nature of whatever new rule might be, coming out today. So it's. I found it very interesting that when you were reading from the nature conservation, their sort of treaties, that, what was it, 2014 it was written in?
It was written in 2007.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that it kind of gives me the feeling that it is conspiratorial. It's like it was planned in a way, or
well, it definitely was. Did you listen to my interview with Juno?
No, I've been a bad listener.
That's okay.
I've been busy, but I'm going to be catching up on all of your stuff here.
Well, that might give you some insight into that from back in the 90s too. What was in the far left groups then is like mainstream now.
Right.
So there's obviously.
It might not be conspiratorial. It could just be like things just picking up momentum.
I don't know. I think they actually use it as a tactic, like it's a strategy.
Yeah.
But before we get off here,
sure.
As I said, time flies.
Yeah, it does.
How do you in your art, do you express some of your ideas, and how does that come to fruition?
Well, I primarily deal in nature, organic forms, and mythologies, archetypes, and things like that. So my work has never really been political. Every once in a while, I'll do some sort of political commentary type of work, but I've always had this vision for my work to transcend current events. So I never want my work to be dated. I never want it to be reflective of the times in so much as being like social commentary, political commentary, that sort of thing. I mean, obviously it's going to reflect the times, it's just going to, because I am here in this point in time. But so it hasn't really affected my work other than my music, my being given an ultimatum by my previous bandmates. So it's had an effect in the way that it has the effect that it's had more than anything hasn't been on the work itself, but how I share my work and how I promote my work, and how I try to, reach out to people, and because who you are as an artist, because as an artist, really what you're doing, you're selling yourself. When you sell your work, you're selling yourself. And if someone doesn't like you, or if they don't agree with your political beliefs, they're going to knock you off PayPal. They're going to say that you're not allowed to exist in this forum any longer. But I've never been one to hide who I am or try to kowtow to some sort of arbitrary set of rules. So that's mostly how it's affected my work.
So you admit that you're violent when you're intoxicated?
Well, sometimes I cry when I'm intoxicated. I'm not always violent. I'm passionate when I get intoxicated sometimes. Yeah. Well, I'm not sure what that has to do with anything, but
nothing.
Thanks.
Nothing. I was just.
Thanks. I am Scottish and German, so just take that for what you will.
So what is the best place for people to go to find your work?
Well, I'm all over social media. I'm a bit of a hermit just by nature, but I have a Patreon account, which I love sharing from that because it kind of acts as a blog as well as subscription. So there's free content on there, as well as for different contributions, you can get access to different levels of content. So that's I'm at Patreon under Joy Art, and then I'm on Instagram and my more political stuff on Twitter, and those are under my Roram Sigami, which is also the name of my website, and I have a YouTube channel under Roram Sigami.
How do you spell these weird words like your last name?
Well, my last name is not weird.
Well,
but I beg to contradict you. But the Roram Sigami is RORRIMSEGAMI, and that's a riddle. It's been my internet handle since having a cool internet handle in the 90s was like a thing. So that's been my internet handle for a long time, and it's a riddle. So if you crack the riddle, it makes knowing what it is easier. And I know that might be bad marketing or branding, but I went with it anyway just because it's been such a part of my persona for such a long time. But yeah, that's Roram Sigami. But my Patreon is Joy Art, JOI Art, and that's my middle name.
Okay, it's funny. Somebody commented recently on Facebook, "Why would anyone watch your show when they can't spell the name, spell or pronounce the name?" I said, "Well, our target audience has an IQ of 110 or above. They have no issues."
Yeah. Well, it took me a minute to figure out how to access it myself. So.
Me too. I didn't know how to spell it for like 2 months after we started. But
yeah, there's like bad branding, maybe, but
it's more symbolic than anything, which to me is more important. So.
Me too. Same. And people will eventually learn. They'll learn it.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, we kind of knew that the only people that would get it would be the ones with a little more wit, and we were okay with that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely more about quality over quantity. I'm not trying to have necessarily mass appeal, but the people who do like my work really like my work, and that gives me, I hate to admit that I need validation, but I think we all need some level of validation. So we're not just solipsist solipsistic and just existing in our own little vacuum. So I get enough feedback to keep, encourage me to know that I'm going in the right direction. I have 26 patrons on Patreon, which I'm very grateful for. I lost a few after the Lauren Southern fiasco and the censorship that Patreon participates in. So that was kind of unfortunate. But I like the platform, and I like the format of the platform, and it makes it easy for me to blog and be in touch with the people who want to support my work.
Well, who knows?
I get to know them and support them as well. So it becomes a community.
You might be on Patreon soon.
Hey, Patreon? Yeah, I was thinking that I probably should set up. Is that still around? Is that becoming successful, or?
Well, I know Brittany Pettybone's on it.
Oh, okay.
Now that I said her name, I can put her name in the tags.
Someone's gonna have to wait till the very end of the show to.
Brittany Pettibone.
Talk about Pettibone. When?
So, well, all right. I think that's all the questions for now. Thank you for coming on.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Everybody, go support her Patreon. And then, while you're at it, since you'll already be on the Patreon site, then you can support ours, too.
Yes.
And we have an official endorsement from Heather.
Yes. Newsletters. You get early access to the videos. Same as with mine. A lot of behind-the-scenes stuff and direct interaction with myself. And so get in while the getting's good, because our early patrons have more access to us and interacting. And I know for myself, if you're also an artist, or I love to give critiques, or receive critiques, and that sort of thing. So
you're like my dad. And
I'm like your dad?
Because I say goodbye and you keep talking.
Yeah, I do have a bad habit of that. All right.
All right. Have a good day.
You too.
All right. Well, that was interesting. That was a good interview. Another thing that kind of came up in conversation I want to touch on before we get off here. She kind of mentioned how the churches are trying to appeal to the masses to increase attendance, and this has resulted in supporting homosexual marriage, waving the rainbow flags everywhere. I did want to point out that has not helped them fill the seats. In fact, it's had quite the opposite effect. I think a lot of people, especially millennials, they have a deeply ingrained desire for authenticity. So the more liberals, they have no interest. I mean, why would you want? I mean, they recognize the phoniness of it. So they just disconnect from Christianity in general and embrace like communist style atheism. But the rest, I mean, the churches that are thriving are the very traditional churches with the hierarchical structures and the ancient liturgies, such as the Orthodox Church. And despite the scandals, which is another story caused by a completely different thing, the Roman Catholic churches, but especially, and of the Roman Catholic churches, the ones that are doing well, Tridentine Mass, Latin Mass, the more traditional parishes. I know SSPX is doing well. So the more traditional churches with the traditional Christian values are the ones that are thriving, because people have a desire for an authentic ancient Christianity, not this generic made up stuff that panders to modern society. That's just not what people want. Anyway, support us on Patreon. Like and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already done so. And we'll see you next week. I will say, I think we're going to switch to Tuesday nights at 9 o'clock. So if I do that, we will not have a show this coming Saturday, but it will be the Tuesday after. So I will know for sure whether that's what I'm going to do on Monday. And well, by Monday afternoon. So keep an eye out on our Facebook page, Facebook.com/Britannium Times, or Twitter at Britannium Times, and just let us know. No worries, Clark. You can watch the playback. Just make sure you share this video and click the like and well, you're already subscribed. But yeah, we might move to Tuesday nights at 9 p.m. after, but we're gonna know for sure on Monday. Anyways, that was a good episode. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next week.